idea for all this really came from a dream?
Yes, it did.
Good evening and welcome to Nox Mente. Tonight's guest is MJ Banias. MJ is the author of The UFO People, A Curious Culture. He is an educator, writer, and blogger. He was a former field investigator with MUFON and has been featured on multiple podcasts and radio shows and contributes to Mysterious Universe and RoguePlanet. His work has been included in Vice, Fortean Times, Fate magazine, and a book entitled UFOs, Reframing the Debate, an excellent book, I might add. He lives in Canada with his wife, 2 children, and a massive pet. MJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. This is very exciting for me.
Yes, welcome, MJ. We're excited to have you on the show.
Totally.
I did a little binging today. I always do that the same day, so I feel fresh.
Yeah, I do that too, actually.
So before we get started, as always, there's a death. I always announce it. And so this one, I think it ties into this show and everything we talk about. So I just wanted to give my condolences to everyone that loved Stanley Love, dancer, choreographer, Juilliard trained, New York City celebrity. If you just hashtag Stanley Love, you'll see all the wonderful tributes going on for him. And he was the first person I called a friend. I met him when I was 6 and he was 5. So, and the thing that makes this one different is it is, there's that one first friend you have, and we were so close for so long that it's hard to separate the early me and my foundation of going to the woods and making forts and feeding the fairies and all this stuff and dancing. Oh my God, so much stuff. So this one's different. I don't believe we die, so I don't have that kind of mourning experience with it. But this is different in that it's a bit of my roots. And it's on the level of, when my mother died decades ago. It's that close in. So I love you, Stanley, forever. And I just wanted to say that. So let's get on with the show. I'm the death talker.
Death merchant. You're the fucking death merchant.
I have had a lot of deaths of people I know in the last 2 years. It's rather shocking. Like I said, I think Generation X and millennials are targeted. And so, but that's a discussion for another show.
Right.
So MJ, this is thrilling. I was having such a good time digging into the stuff you have on YouTube and you've actually put out some of the details that we start with, which is your early life. So give us a look back to the earliest part of your life you can remember and stuff that influenced the very early you. Cartoons, nature, any of that kind of stuff that just sticks out.
Yeah, it's weird to talk about, like your very early past in your childhood when you're, in this community, because you never really get the opportunity to. So this is cool. I think my early childhood was fairly standard in some ways, and then just kind of different in a lot of other ways. So I was generally sort of an outdoorsy kind of kid. But I was also a nerd at the same time. So I had this weird upbringing. My parents were very adamant about me going to sort of summer camp, and we had a trailer out in sort of like the woods kind of thing, on a rented sort of camping spot. And I lived in this sort of almost forested area. It was a massive park that we rented a spot in, and it was just trees everywhere. So I definitely sort of lived out in nature often, and I still do. I'm a big fan of making sure my kids have a similar upbringing. So we have a place out sort of in the middle of nowhere in the woods as well, because I want them to hug trees and stuff. That was part of it. So there was always the mystery for me of what's around the corner or what's on the other side of these woods. And then on the flip side, I was also, a super geeky, dweeby kid who always got picked on at school and was really into Star Trek and Star Wars and playing Dungeons and Dragons and science fiction and all that. So those are sort of my earliest memories. The vast majority of my friends, kind of participated in the same stuff I did. We all went to camp together, and we all had these little trailers, near each other in this sort of forest. And then, and then in the wintertime, and when we weren't out there, we'd be, at each other's houses, playing video games or Dungeons and Dragons, and watching cheesy science fiction movies, and monster movies. So that was my childhood upbringing. My parents probably made some questionable decisions from a parenting standpoint, letting their very impressionable young son watch the X Files when he was way too young, or episodes of uh, Star Trek and Sherlock Holmes and all of these sort of murder mysteries and stuff like that. That became a huge aspect of my life. Even to this day, I still love watching that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's sort of the earliest framework, I guess, of my childhood I can sort of piece together.
Yeah, but did your
Well,
parents consider you the experiment child?
I was an only child, so there was
Okay.
no other option.
Okay,
I
yeah.
have no siblings, right? So
Yeah.
they all of their eggs went into one basket at this point.
I hear that.
Well, clearly, it was not a bad thing to have you exposed to all that wonderful sci-fi. Look where it's led you. I mean, it's a direct connection, and I think it's wonderful to see. And it does, on some level, open the imagination up in wonderful ways.
I
You
agree with
know,
you, actually. Yeah, it's funny. I noticed that though with my kids, my children are still very young, so they're not really into TV or movies yet. They're still too small to appreciate it. My daughter can sit through 20 minutes of a film before having to just like run around. But with summer and being outside the lake and the cabin, you can see the imagination sort of forming, right? They're both the kind of kids who can just pick up a stick and walk out into the woods, and they're gone for hours. Obviously I'm sort of watching them, but I'm not some awful parent, but they're kind of out in the woods, kind of doing their own thing, with a stick, and that's the extent of their toys, and they just run around and make up stuff and run down the paths and the trails. Who knows what they're doing in their minds, but it's interesting to watch them develop that sort of imagination, where they have the luxury of acres and acres of empty forest, um, that they could just play in. So I hope some of my insanity rubs off on them a little bit, and they can sort of have that creative aspect as well.
yeah, I consider that a gift as well, and and actually, the deeper into this digital world we get, I think that's going to pay off in a very large way, because it seems like so many kids are detached from nature. So this is, kudos to you. That's grandparenting, in my opinion. And I certainly had that with the going in the woods. It formed me. When you were little, were you one of those kids that made forts and all that?
Oh man, yeah, we would go all over the place, and we would find these. They're great. They're when trees collapse and fall down, right? They split. If a lot of times where I am, we have a lot of pine trees and jack pine trees. So they have the needles, right? They're conifers. So the way they fall, over about 2 years, all the needles fall off, but the weight of all the branches pushes this. It creates this almost canopy, on the ground. So you have this log, this whole tree that's just kind of lying on its side, and then it's resting on this massive canopy of brambles and branches, and it creates this perfect fort for any kid. You just kind of go in there and you cut away at a few pieces. You make yourself a little entrance, and then you're totally surrounded by this sort of bushy, brambly, kind of gnarly, fortress that is impenetrable. And it's the neatest thing because you can fit, depending on the size of the tree. We had trees out where we were. You could fit 5, 6 kids in there comfortably, and we would, we'd build little chairs, or we'd bring a little table in there. I'd go to find a small little plastic table by the campfire that my dad has, and I'd steal it and run off with it, and we'd stick it in there, and we'd play cards or whatever. So yeah, we totally were fort builders. We would store food in there sometimes, where probably inappropriately, because we weren't afraid of bears. We should have been. We'd put food in coolers, and we just like live in these things. Yeah, we did it all the time.
That you sound like you'd be one of my friends. That's how we did. It was, this was something that I noticed as a kid. It was we were the outsiders, my little group. Every family was involved, and that's kind of where we were able to be ourselves, and which developed these amazing. We're eccentric people. We actually got a sense of knowing ourselves by being outsiders and then creating that relationship. And so I was wondering about you with that. You'd mentioned you got picked on a little bit in school. Did that pay off for you as far as this getting into D&D and forts with your friends and all this kind of really enchanting, fascinating stuff that was going on when you weren't in school?
In a certain way, it's interesting. I was never. I grew up always being a follower. So I would often befriend the people who I shouldn't have befriended, and I would maintain friendships even with people who were bullies and abusive. And I don't know why that is. It's just I had this need to please everyone. I think when I was younger. As I got older, I realized that's not a healthy way to live. So that's definitely not me anymore. But I think what it formed when it comes to sort of an identity was one the ability to almost camouflage myself into other groups and just kind of lay low and stay in the shadows a little bit and not take the spotlight, because I was never that type of person. I was never someone who liked the spotlight. I was never a leader. I was always the one who was willing to take commands and just keep their head down, and maintain a circle of friends. But like I said, as I got older into my teens, I realized that was sort of no way to live a life. And I think what it maybe forced me to do was reflect upon that, and now carry into sort of my old age now. The fact that those types of people exist, right? Those sort of kids in the corner, who are the followers, and they don't know how to be leaders, and they don't know how to establish healthy and proper relationships. Um, and ultimately, you know, help them find their place. So, I'm a school teacher sort of as my full-time, mortgage paying job. I teach middle school, so I teach 14-year-old kids. And it's great because ultimately I'm the one who sort of attracts all the kids who are sort of the dweebs and the nerds, right? Because they kind of see that in me, and we have like a D&D club, and we play, board games at lunch and whatever. And all the other kids kind of, do their thing. They play sports or whatever. And then I sort of collect these little broken toys and basically tell them you're not actually a broken toy. You're just a different toy. And you can do whatever the hell you want. Right. So yeah, I think it's shaped that in a way for me. Um, I, yeah, that's an interesting question. I have to kind of reflect more on that now.
It's great to hear, and yeah, again, I think you're definitely my kind of people, and it brought to mind. So this kind of little look into early, you brought to mind what sun sign and rising and moon are you, if you know the other two.
I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry.
Do you know what sun sign you are? Your astrological sign.
Oh, this is like, yes, I'm a Cancer.
Okay, Cancer. Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Happy belated birthday.
Yes, thank you very much.
That's excellent. So into the pop culture stuff early on,
Mhm.
so the sci-fi and all that, did you experience any of the like the terrors, like the thing under the bed or in the
Oh man, yeah,
dark?
yeah. I was one of those kids who, after watching, a scary TV show, scary movie, I couldn't sleep, and I would hide under my bed covers. Um, because every single bump or noise in the house, right, would send me into a panic. I was totally one of those kids. I should, like I said, my parents maybe made some questionable choices. Like, I was afraid to go to bed. Um, yeah, I remember having like nightmares and night terrors about the stuff I used to watch. Um, I can't remember what it was. I was watching. Oh man, my parents were weird. we were watching this strange, it was like an A&E documentary on like the chupacabra, right? And I mean, obviously I'm like 8 or something or 7, and my parents were watching this because they were kind of into it too. And I remember watching this awful CG and these animated pictures and stuff of this creature, killing goats and chasing cars. And I remember standing up to use the bathroom, and I started walking down in my basement, and it had sort of had this long hallway in my parents' basement, and the lights were off, because unfortunately we had this awful lighting that if you had the lights on in front of the TV, it would reflect and you couldn't see the TV. So the lights were off, and I'm walking towards the bathroom, and my mom had this, uh, I guess it was a stand, a plant stand. So it was a stool, basically, that a potted plant would sit on, but it looked like legs, and my parents jokingly put like a little pair of jeans on it to make it seem like legs holding up this potted plant. And I remember walking down the hallway, and I totally forgot it was there, and I turned the corner to step in the bathroom, and there's these legs there, and I jumped. I must have hit the ceiling. I jumped so high, and I screamed and ran for my life because I was convinced that was the chupacabra standing right there. Like, it scared the crap out of me. Yeah, so, and I was such a jumpy kid after these shows. And I still almost am to a point. Even as an adult, I'll watch, like I'll watch like The Walking Dead, or I'll watch some horror movie, and I kind of still, like, I'm in my basement, it's dark. Am I going to turn the corner and see this thing? Right. I'm still very much like that in that kind of mentality.
I love that so much. Yeah, it gets you right in the mood. That is, that's like a roundabout description of suspension of disbelief in a
Oh,
way.
yes. Oh, yeah. Okay, this one just came to mind because now you're talking about it, and now you're raising all these memories. So I still am a big fan, but I was a huge fan of um, the Sherlock Holmes TV series out of the 1980s from the BBC with Jeremy Brett. You ever watch this show? It's an old British. It's from the
Yes,
80s.
I did, and I
Right?
loved it.
Jeremy Brett, yeah, and it was like a BBC special. They did whatever, 5 or 6 seasons of this, and it's my parents were into it. I was into it. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love the idea of the mystery. I love all this stuff. And there was this one of the stories, and one of the episodes was it was called The Dancing Men. And this was this plot that this guy was drawing these symbols on people's yards, and it was basically a language that they had invented because they all worked together in the past to like rob banks, or they had some sort of criminal organization. And these dancing men symbols are like stick men that were in different positions, and they meant stuff, and it would scare people, and then obviously people would die because they got this message and they'd freak out, whatever. Anyway, in one of the scenes, a guy is dreaming and he's sleeping, and he sees these men dancing, like these stick figures kind of very quickly cutting, and they look like they're dancing in his mind. I remember I had nightmares about that for some reason. Like, I went to bed as a kid and I had similar dreams where there were these dancing stick figured men, and it scared the hell out of me. And I still, like, every once in a while that'll pop into my mind, and it really affected me as a kid. And I have no idea why. It's totally like silly, and upon reflection, like, I can't imagine why anyone would be scared of like drawn stick figure men. But I still am. I find them eerie.
I love this story, thank you. That is interesting that it would spark such
Yeah.
a significant reaction from you, considering that it's not like terror, it's not
No,
horror or anything, it's stick
but I
figures.
think it was because the person in it who was having the dream was so viscerally afraid of it. I
Mhm.
almost became afraid of it, right? Um,
Transference, yeah.
yeah, I could sort of imagine his fear,
Yes.
and it became real for me in a sense. But I think there's something sort of fascinating there. I mean, ultimately, his fear of these sort of sticky figures was totally nonsensical because he should be afraid of the person drawing them, because the person who's drawing them is the one who's going to kill him, and he knows it. Um, and I think that that's kind of what's interesting he's not sure what to be afraid of, right? He's not sure whether he should be afraid of the stick figures, or what they symbolize, or the murderer himself that Sherlock Holmes is eventually going to bust. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe I'm compelled to be like, I'm sort of unaware of what to actually be afraid of. And it's interesting how fear kind of works that way, right? We're sort of unsure of what we ought to fear and what we ought to find not scary, I guess.
True. However, the astrologers in the house would pull up to the fact that since you're a Cancer sun, which is all we know on your natal chart, that you are able to, the water signs in particular, are very psychic, like empathically psychic, so that it's possible you pick up on these emotions and you internalize them. And
Interesting.
so I'm just saying, for the astrologers, there's grit there. There's something to grab onto that is logical. And for me, certainly, because I love astrology. So it all leads me to, were you brought up with a particular religion?
Yeah, I was born Ukrainian Catholic. So
Oh,
it's
old school.
basically Catholic. It's just the Orthodox tradition.
Yes.
So when the Roman Catholic Church ventured into sort of the Eastern European countries, there was it was already established as a Catholic Church, but then you had a major division between Orthodox and Catholic, and then some of the churches chose to join the Roman Catholic Church, but they maintained the Eastern tradition rites of the Orthodox Church. So anyway, I was born Ukrainian Catholic,
Are you
which is still
Ukrainian?
both of my parents are. Yes, my parents are Ukrainian.
Wasn't it the
Um,
Ukrainian bishop or something that went down to Antarctica in
I'm not.
2016?
Jerry, I
I
think
don't
it
know.
was the Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite flavors of Catholicism. My name's Danishka, of course,
Hmm.
and I love that flavor because there is still there's a lot of the old stuff in there that makes it kind of mystical. I mean, the Catholicism is mystical to me
It's
personally.
incredibly mystical. Yeah, I'm Roman Catholic now. I became, well, I didn't really become Roman Catholic. You just kind of cross the aisle in a sense.
Yes.
I'm Roman Catholic. But it's a very, very mystical and magical
And
religion.
beautiful, absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful. It's I'm inspired. I'm always sad when I hear people that are having that have baggage with it, and I certainly get it. I didn't get any religion pushed on me, so I don't have any,
Right.
and I get the idea of having religious baggage for sure, no doubt. However, if you just look back, if you just look at it, it's just such a beautiful sense of devotion to the mysteries. And it's just got such beautiful aspects to it. And the Orthodox stuff in particular, I mean, it just really, I mean, to me, I'm going to say this, it's really witchy.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I hopefully the nuns that I go to church with aren't listening, but no, excuse me. I agree. I being raised Ukrainian Catholic, there's a very the two perspectives of Roman Catholicism and Ukrainian Catholicism, or the Orthodox Church, are very interesting. And I'm not sure if Orthodox Christians would agree with me, um, but there's this within the Eastern tradition. There's this very top-down approach, right? God is up there and we're down here, and
Yes.
our job is to continuously sort of ask for help and mercy. Um, and if you don't ask hard enough, you don't get it, right? Within and as a Roman Catholic, it was very interesting because it's flipped on its head. The idea within Roman Catholicism is, at least I would say ideologically, is that the divine is with you. You are an aspect of the divine, and the divine is an aspect of you, and you interact with it on a base level. It's an aspect of self, right?
Yeah.
Saint Paul, sort of famously wrote that, um, you know, the way of God is the way of the people, and the way of the people is the way of God, right? Like, it's this as above, so below, um, sort of hermetic philosophy, right? And I'm St. Paul was a good sort of esoteric writer. The Catholic Church doesn't like to say that, but he really was. He's kind of one of the earliest guys who said stuff like, there's no such thing as man or woman, Jew or Greek. Everyone is part of one system, right? You are all part of
Yes.
one
Yes.
eternal, divine, cosmic order. You are all parts of the larger machine, I guess is the weird term, the weird way to say it. But he's like I said, he's a good hermeticist, and Catholics kind of go like, whoa, what are you talking about? But let's be honest, he definitely studied his Plato and Socrates and Aristotle.
Yes.
So yeah, it's funny when I talk to other Catholics because we sort of talk about how connected it all is, and I kind of start dropping in these ideas of hermeneutics and stuff like that, and like, well, what, wait, hold on, man, and then we get into weird conversations. But yeah, it's fun.
I love Paul, and I also, but with the Orthodox stuff, I like the idea of the ladder, the ascension
Yeah,
to the Godhead, whatever that is. And
right,
again, I wasn't raised in this, so I see it. I see it more as an occultist and a magician, I guess. And so there's something to that in the end it's all within us, so I'm definitely more in the Roman side of this. But I like the imagery that one gets from the Orthodox stuff, and it serves in a story that's relatable with a journey, and that
right,
ladder is part of the journey up to,
right.
and with the mechanism of projection into the outer world, it's got a lot of grit and juice to it,
Well, I
and
think.
it's created a lot of very interesting people.
Oh, for sure, and I think it speaks to the success, like the historical success of Christianity and Catholicism and even Orthodoxy as um as the largest religion on the planet. I mean, it at the time when it first came about, it manifested in a very Platonic and Aristotelian world. It was like esotericism and hermeticism was like the key ideas that were flourishing within philosophies at the time. But it butted up against the world order, right? And ultimately, you had all these Greeks running around who were totally hippy dippy philosophers, um, who were super artists, and they were basically talking about what the divine was and what it meant to be a person, and that everything is interconnected, and as above,
Mhm.
so below. That was totally the philosophy of Greek thinkers at the time,
Yes, yeah.
and they were being oppressed, right, by this powerful, very very dominant culture in Rome, that really maintained law and order over everyone, and was this sort of very wishy washy. You can believe whatever you want so long as you pay us taxes, and you sort of just basically say the emperor is a god, we'll be okay with that.
Yes.
But everything was sort of business. It was a very good, Rome was a very good sort of imperious, like sort of fascist capitalist system that was, it was wonderful. And then you suddenly had this sort of little religion that kind of pops up that starts kind of rekindling these old Greek ideas that everything's connected, and not only that, it tied in a lot of politics, right? I mean, early Christianity was very much a listen. It's better to be poor. It's better to have a shitty life. Sorry, I swear on your show?
Oh, yeah,
It's
yes, of
yeah,
course.
it's better to have a really bad life, because the divine functions in poverty, and the divine functions in weakness, and if you're quiet and weak and hurt, that's where the divine exists. The haughty and the powerful, they've lost their access to the divine. The divine doesn't like that. The divine doesn't want people who think they don't need the divine, right? So it flourished. I mean, there's a lot more poor people all the time than there are wealthy people.
Yes.
And it flourished in an era where you had this oppressive power, um, and ultimately, there's a reason why there's something like 1.3 or 1.4 billion Catholics or something, and it's the largest religion on the planet, because it still speaks to the poor, I think, in a way. Um,
Well, and look where
where
we are. Times of, that the more times things change, the more they stay the same. Here we are still, with the majority being, you know, the with the pyramid, right? With the very few at the top, and the majority of us are below
Right. Yeah,
on these
exactly.
scales, on this, at least in the schema of things.
Oh, right. I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, you look at where Christianity as religion is thriving, right? It's in Africa, it's in Asia,
Yes.
it's in the global South, right?
Yes.
And the global East.
Less educated areas, in other words.
I wouldn't use the term less educated. I would use the term. I would say where poverty is still incredibly rampant, where there's incredible uh, uh, government control, despotism, a situation where there is no hope for people, and every day is a struggle. I think within Western nations, we have a lot more comfort, we have a lot more security, so we can rely on ourselves, and our own, um, I don't use the term entitlement, our own, um, uh, oh shoot, I forgot the word. Like when you have stuff,
Privilege.
our own privilege. Thank you very much, to kind of keep us out of um, suffering, let's say, or starvation or whatever. This is getting into heavy political discourse, and,
Yeah,
and
I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Well, but with this, and we're tying this always back in. I'm guiding us here. We're always coming back to dreams. It is this particular narrative that it's people that have less or are having a harder time struggling, that find the depth and find meaning in synchronicities, even if they don't pull up to the idea of synchronicities. And
Sure.
where structured religion comes in is a set of symbols that serves a purpose, and it plays out in their unconscious, in the dream world, in the ethers, in the otherness. And it aside from all the political stuff tied into religion,
Right.
that's a higher function. And that, whereas people that are comfortable in life, they often don't think about these things until the glass house shatters. They've gotten
Right.
an ill health diagnosis, or someone close to them has passed on, or something that shakes the foundation. And so this is always something that has drawn. I've been drawn to people that understand suffering, and I feel like those that have moved through and have worked on themselves, whatever the system they're using is, you can tell it's there. So I have friends that are very devout Christians that I've grown up with, and there's no judgment on either side. They're not trying to convert me.
Right.
But so coming back with this state of consciousness and with all this in mind, what were your dreams like? So we left off a little bit in the night terrors and stuff.
Mhm.
So the early you, and now we can bring you up forward a bit, but still the earlier you, the first half of your life, what were your dreams like? And what were the dreams? Did you have a lot of dreams of were there night terrors that were coming uh, through the ethers to you? Were things vivid? What was going on in your dream world?
Man, I can recall one night terror specifically. I can't recall any others just off the top of my head. I had one, I think, that was sort of very startling, to the point where I still remember it. Like, I can still, like, I can replay it in my mind, like a tape. The rest of my dreams, though, I did have a lot of lucid dreams where I was able to sort of maneuver myself inside them. I have, whenever I am dreaming and I don't like where a dream is going, I'll often wake myself up. So I've always had the ability to recognize when I was in a dream or when I wasn't. Um, so I can often, like, I'll often be in the middle of a dream, and I can recall basically telling myself, being like, nope, I'm out. And I would just wake myself up and not, engage with that dream anymore. And I would try to shift gears. I could wake myself up, get out of bed, walk around, come back to bed to like reset the brain in a sense, so I wouldn't have to deal with that again. But when it comes to sort of the dreams I remember, I have to be honest, I'm one of those people who doesn't remember very much, and I'm not sure why that is. Um, so I can tell you about my one night terror that I had, I suppose, and we can start
Yes.
there, and we'll see if that rekindles anything.
Yes. Lay that on us.
So I must have been, maybe I was 10, something that I wasn't a teenager yet, but and I don't remember what brought it on, so I don't have like a context to provide. I can't remember if I watched a movie or anything like that. I think I was in bed, so I recall, and I was lying in my bed, and this I had a sliding door, so my bedroom had one of those weird sliding doors that went into the wall. It was a very 1960s house, so all I remember in the dream was lying there and then hearing my bedroom door slide open, quite forcefully. And I sort of sat up, and in the doorway was this sort of tall black figure of a man, but he was totally just a black shadow. There was no face, there was no features, almost like it was just like he didn't. It was just a shadow, and he stood in the doorway, and I, being 10, was very afraid. So I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. Didn't want to get out of bed. I was very afraid. And he walks into my room, and he sat on the edge of the bed right next to me. And I remember feeling like the bed compress under his weight. And then um, I was still pretending to be asleep. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was 10 years old, and then I felt like his hands wrap themselves around my neck, and he basically like throttled me, like choked me. And I remember lying there, trying to breathe, trying to scream, trying to move, and I remember I couldn't. I opened my eyes, and I remember sort of seeing this black shadow, um, hands wrapped around my neck. And I had an almost like I had this odd out of body experience in my dream where I sort of left my body within the nightmare, and watched myself not be able to move, and almost reflected strangely in that moment of, it's odd that you're not moving right now. Like, you should be flailing around, and for some reason, like, your arms can't move, your legs can't move. It's like you're totally frozen. And then I don't know what happened. This went on for what seemed like minutes, and then suddenly I sort of popped back into my body, and I opened my eyes, and I was in my room. There was no shadow person. The door was still closed, and I was clearly awake at this point. And I obviously had my neck hurt, right? Um, it was like almost like a shadow pain, right? And then I sort of just, I was startled awake, and I just got up, and I remember, I think I went upstairs and then told my parents. I probably crawled into bed with them, and that was the extent of it. But I can remember, like I said, I can see it to this day. I don't think I've ever encountered a dream sort of so frightening, to the point where I can replay it like that in my mind.
This is a classic sleep paralysis story.
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty confident that's all it really was.
Well, that's not, I mean, all is rushing over it, because sleep paralysis is significant. It is a state of being lucid, but you're in between
Yes.
these states. It's a very big deal, I think. I mean, I still just, I'm not a fan of it when it happens. And I recently just had an actual terror experience myself, and I haven't in years. But I find myself pushing into it because it's so fascinating and takes you right into the now. And what is the now? The now is actually high lucidity. And so this is a great one. And the fact that you had this kind of phantom pain in your neck too,
Hmm.
really significant. It's,
Yeah,
it's so 10 years old too. That I imagine, I can tell it stayed with you. So it had to be alarming for sure.
yeah, it was very strange. Because I was never able to, and I still like to don't know why or what brought it on. But it was very funny because before I got into UFOs, and started researching the UFO subculture, and doing research for the book, and all of this process, I chummed around a bit with a local ghost hunting group. And I wasn't really an investigator or anything like that. I was just I kind of answered their emails, because they just needed someone who could, handle the email and like, not the business aspect, but just the communications aspect, because they were all busy. So I decided, this is interesting. I was kind of getting into the paranormal subculture, so again, sort of from an academic standpoint, just kind of trying to research and meet these people, because that's what my book's really about. That's what I'm really interested in, is subcultures and studying subcultures. Um, so I started chumming around with these paranormal investigators, and they're still friends today. But I went on an investigation with them because I'd never done it before. I had answered all these emails. I had talked to all these witnesses, and got their stories down, and booked all these paranormal investigations, but I never really did any. So I decided, I'm going to go on one. I'm just going to, just on a lark. Because at the time I didn't really believe it. And we were in this house talking to this family, and the young boy, who was probably 9 or 10 at the time, talked about and told us that he often sees and he called him the shadow man at his door. And this was he wasn't really scary, he wasn't really kind, he just sort of at night would come and stand by his door and look into his room. And the boy would see him, and then the shadow man would just stand there for a little bit and then walk away, and leave the room, and do something else. And when I heard this, I remember listening to the boy tell me this story, and just like the hair on my neck, and like I just got hit with like these chills, right? Because that's sort of what I saw, right? I had this odd shadow man experience as a young boy. And it was an odd, I don't want to use the term synchronicity because I'm not sure if it was, but it was an odd event for me, because it brought back, right, the dream, and everything that I had experienced, and was like, oh my goodness, this is weird that this little 10-year-old kid is seeing this shadowed man standing in his door, which is like what I saw, right? So it was an interesting experience. Unfortunately, the house wasn't haunted. Like we couldn't find any evidence, I suppose. But it was an interesting moment in
Of
my
reflection,
early
sure.
yeah in my early subcultural study of the paranormal community.
I have I wonder, so moving into this a little deeper, I wonder if what are your thoughts on the shadow man that you encountered and then you re-encountered through this child on this investigation? So the paralysis experience, if we strip that out of it and we look at the being and the beings that people experience with them, and certainly since I just had one recently, well, I've had a few, but one where had a face, got a face and it's looking in at me. It was
Hmm.
so scary. And what are your thoughts? And especially, so I'm asking you this and asking you this in a way of putting on your investigative hat here. So, from the modern you, especially, what are your thoughts on these as entities that come to, possibly feed on us, or whatever their agenda is, and not from the psychological standpoint, but that these are entities in and of themselves. And for me, my experience recently, certainly this did not feel like a externalized chateau form from my unconscious content.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
was I feel pretty secure in the fact that this actually felt like an astral being and it was pushing and driving its own vehicle. So
Sure.
where do you stand there?
Yeah, it's it's such a difficult question, because unfortunately, when it comes to the especially within the UFO community, we get so mired in ideological constructs that we've created ourselves, and we sort of attribute to whatever the other is. I'm prepared to go down the road that there exists, and there always has existed, some sort of other that we engage with in some way. I can't comment, and I can't secure myself to a position that it's extraterrestrial, or it's interdimensional, or it's the typical sort of often cited almost like tropish to a point. You know, examples that exist, that they're the reptilians and the grays and all this stuff. I can't go down that road because I don't think that there's enough for that. I don't think we've done the basic work yet to get to those statements as being sort of truth statements. But when it comes to the objective, let's say, existence of this other, whatever it is, I think we're dealing with something that uses us as a sort of sounding board. I'm prepared to go down that road because we can catalog historically that um, you know there were more sightings of certain types of entities in the past, and those sightings have gone down today, and there's more sightings now of more modern entities, um, that are sort of more in modern mythology, that are being witnessed more by people. So let's say, modern day would be, post Second World War. You're seeing, a lot more technological monsters, aliens and flying saucers and UFOs and that type of thing. But 500 years ago, you weren't necessarily seeing that. You were seeing more accounts of angels or elves or fairies. It's not that people don't see those today, but I would say the numbers have gone down. So I think that whatever the other is, it uses our cultural frame of reference as a sort of point to ping off of, and it allows itself to use that to become physical in some way or manifest in some way. I'm really a big fan of Henry Corbin's, he's French, so I should say probably like Henri Corbin's version of the mundus imaginalis, or the imaginal realm, right? Where it's this battleground between our physical daily reality and the intellect, and there's this sort of middle ground where the imagination dwells, and aspects of our daily life filter into this imaginal realm. Our cultural zeitgeist, our ideologies, our filters, our social backgrounds, our values all filter in upwards into this imaginal realm, and our intellectual, sort of mental states sort of trickle down into it, and within this imaginal world, this middle world, you have the formation of these creatures and beings and things and ideas that can take shape and form and sort of spew outwards into our reality and interact with us in some physical way. So when people have encounters with monsters, let's say, it's not that when an encounter with the monster stops, the monster runs into the woods and it lives there and it just kind of hangs out in the woods and eats and poops and does this thing, and then it finds someone else and hunts. That monster, I believe, kind of disappears, until someone else bumps into something that kind of manifests that creature out of this sort of sounding board, middle realm, imaginal realm, and sort of brings it back out into our world. So I'm kind of, I like that. I dig that. It's in my book, because I think it answers a lot of, and it creates a lot of solutions to a lot of problems when it comes to people's encounters with strange entities, because there's just so damn many of them, and half the time, like, they're one-offs, and they don't make sense. And a lot of times they're sort of very culturally based. People are seeing aliens that they saw in movies, kind of thing.
Baba Yaga.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's a good Ukrainian one, right? Baba Yaga is a great
Right.
Ukrainian one, right? She has like chicken legs or something, or her house has chicken legs,
Yes.
or something,
Yes.
like in the original story.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you think
So-
about? I've thought about this for a while too, and my conclusion on, I think you're right about the manifestation being localized, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
But I think what it is I think the mechanism behind that is more that there's an energy field that your energy field is interacting with, and your brain is trying to render it for you or provide imagery.
Sure.
And that plays off of all your experiences. But it's in the nexus of those two fields is where these things occur. That liminal space.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think we are dealing with some sort of meeting of minds, in a sense, right? That allows us to recognize it, whatever it is.
Mhm.
There's the old, there's this old idea that was, I think it was his name was, I think the guy who wrote it, I can't remember it now. Damn it. See, I'm my brain is mush. Little kids, right? There's this old story that was written by one of Christopher Columbus's, I believe, sort of lieutenants or the ship's doctor or something. And it's totally true, or sorry, it's totally untrue. It's totally sort of racially biased and tropish, and it's sort of colonialist. So I'm not defending it politically in any way, but they made this claim that when the three boats appeared off the coast in South America and in the Caribbean, local indigenous groups couldn't see them, right? So they would, these local indigenous fishermen were fishing on their boats, and suddenly the Pinta the Nina and the Santa Maria would just park themselves, and they these guys would get on these little boats and start paddling out to the shore, and the fishermen would keep fishing like they weren't there. And the belief was that the technology that the Europeans had at the time was so advanced that the local indigenous groups in South America and in the Caribbean couldn't fathom it. Therefore, they couldn't see it. It was so outside their realm of perception that the boats were invisible to them because they weren't, they couldn't see them. Now that's silly. That's not necessarily true. I think that's total, just again, colonialist bullshit. But I think
the idea of it.
I think the interesting thing though from that, and then I think what we can learn from that is the local indigenous groups and Columbus and the Europeans, they're still human, and they're able to communicate with each other because we're all still human. I think if we were dealing, let's say, with an intelligence that was so outside of our humanity, so apart from us, so distant from us in every single possible way, biologically, even physically, in like the laws of physics kind of sense, right? It was so separate from us. Could we recognize it in its natural form? Only because we've been evolving and are still evolving for the last billion years or so, to recognize the world directly around us, to filter out data that is unnecessary to keep us alive, and only collect data that keeps us alive. The bear and the food on the ground kind of thing. Imagine if you're dealing with something so far outside of that biological upbringing, that evolutionary upbringing, it would be invisible to you, right? If we're dealing with an intelligence that is so it's the antithesis to humanity, would we be able to recognize it for what it is, or would it just sort of be there and we would ignore it? Our filters would just filter that data out.
Right. There was a movie years ago called Eric the Viking with Tim. I forget his name.
Oh, I recall that, Jer.
It had Terry Jones from Monty Python and Tim Robbins.
Right, okay.
Tim Robbins was Eric the Viking. Anyway, there's a scene in it where they're going conquering or what have you. They're in a boat with a Catholic priest, and the priest is praying to God or Jesus, whatever, to save them, and they pray to Thor, and they were going to Valhalla. That's what it was. So anyway, they finally get to Valhalla. They travel there, I don't know how, and they're walking around and they're seeing all their people who have died, and all the gods are there, the Norse gods, and the Catholic priest is looking around going, who are you talking to? What are you seeing? He couldn't fathom, like you said, the idea of Norse gods when he's so
right. Yeah, and I think that's such a great analogy, right? I mean, it's perfect. If there is an intelligence, but it's so far removed from us, it's going to need to somehow use us and our filters to allow it, or allow us to see it, right? So I think that's an interesting little. It's speculative. It's purely speculative. I can't prove any of this,
sure.
But I think it's my current sort of, let's say, I'll use the term belief system, because it creates and it fixes, I think, a lot of errors or a lot of issues that we face within modern paranormal discourse. Like I said, we generate a lot of ideologies surrounding the phenomenon that we experience. The problem is that they all start to rub up against each other once you actually start having conversations with each other, right? What starts to occur is if a person has a certain set of ideological belief, let's say in regards to extraterrestrials, well, any case that contradicts that is going to be by them deemed to be nonsensical or not possible. But the same thing happens on the other side, right? The people who have certain other beliefs are going to be like, well, what the hell, reptilians, that's stupid, because it doesn't fit into their belief structure. And I think there's this potentially movement towards sort of paranormal ideology where we can sort of start having these conversations that, you know, UFOs are identical to ghosts, and they're identical to Bigfoot, and they're identical to other monsters, and they're identical to psi phenomena and synchronicities. It's all tied into one universal system. And I know that a lot of people don't like that. I know a lot of people don't like, you know, poltergeists with their UFOs or Bigfoot mixed into their psi phenomena theory. But you know, I think that's kind of, once you start kind of looking at it in that wider perspective, you start to see a lot of similarities and a lot of things that run through, like the similar through lines that run in between these discourses. So yeah, that's there. I've said my piece.
One of the things I've noticed that I see as an issue is the conflation of UFOs, the term UFO, with alien.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I do think that they're like the TTSA crap, the Tic Tac and all that stuff. I think that's human tech. That's black tech.
Sure.
Or ancient found tech. I don't think it's necessarily aliens, but they don't make that distinction.
Well, so, I think that the gut reaction. I mean, the UFO community is, and I'm a member of it, so I can say that. I can say this. I think we're so mired in the idea of aliens, and it all began really in like the 1940s and 50s.
1947, exactly.
Yeah, and really when you know, Donald Kehoe kind of came out and said, you know, it's got to be extraterrestrials because humans don't have this kind of technology. You know, we suddenly bought in, and we're still kind of haunted by this ghost of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Because I think what you have, especially now, I think millennials are a little better at this. I think millennials are a little better at being like, well, hold on a second, like, why do we think it's alien? Like, why is that belief system in place, right? And what you have is with a lot of younger UFO researchers, they're very much prepared and willing to take aliens out of the equation, and not even like they fall along the lines of, it could be aliens, but it could also be a lot of other things. So let's talk about everything, right? And there is this, like I said, this ideological framework that exists within the UFO community to constantly deal with aliens as if it's like a given. And the problem is the mainstream media has really latched onto that, right? Like the mainstream media loves it when people talk about UFOs, because automatically the gut move is to then talk about aliens and play the X-Files theme music and you know, all that sort of tropish crap, because it sells and it drives clicks and it you know,
it's sensational.
It does sensationalize it. And the problem is the vast majority of UFO sightings, there's like no connection to aliens or extraterrestrials whatsoever. People just see weird stuff.
Right.
And then you have these weird UFO sightings where people see weird stuff and then suddenly their house is like haunted for 2 weeks. Right? You know, like shit starts moving on its own and there's like books flying off shelves, and then, you know, it kind of dies down. So it makes you wonder, like, well, like, what kind of aliens are these? So I find it interesting to watch these movements and this ebb and flow of ideas that shape the UFO subculture. But you see this in the paranormal subculture too. You know, like the paranormal subculture, especially with like ghost hunting. The ideology of ghosts being the souls of the dead is huge, right? I mean, the vast majority of ghost hunters, if I walked up to a ghost hunting conference and said, you know, how do you know they're actually dead people? You know, people would go ballistic on me, right?
Souls or demons, don't forget.
Yeah, right. A lot of Judeo-Christian sort of, but it's all been tied in, right? Again, you've had a whole history of mainstream and pop culture media feeding this notion. So when you think about a ghost, you automatically go down the road that it's a dead person who's communicating to you from the afterlife. You know, if we actually kind of try to think about why that is, it would most likely tie to movies and books and
we're well programmed individuals.
Yeah, and you know, I really like some. There's some funny UFO researchers, paranormal investigators out there. Do you know Greg and Dana Newkirk?
Yes.
Awesome. I love those people because we
love them.
They stroll into, they're the type of people, because they're so unbiased, I think, ideologically. They walk into a Bigfoot conference and give a lecture on why Bigfoot is a ghost. I almost died when I heard their lecture and heard people talk about it, because the Bigfoot people were like, "That's crazy! Bigfoot's not a ghost; he's an animal." And they're like, you know, they lost their minds at the possibility that someone was standing in front of them postulating that Bigfoot's a ghost.
Was it a CryptidCon last year?
It was like a cryptid. Yeah, I'm not sure it was last year. It was 2 years ago.
Okay, I was at the one last year and this year too.
Yeah, it was awesome because I mean, you can imagine these Bigfoot hunters who own guns and they go out in the woods and try to shoot Bigfoot. You can't shoot a ghost. You know what I mean? Like it totally challenges their frame of reference. I love it. It's the best.
Well, one of the interesting things that I learned at the Cryptid Con when I was there was from the guy who ran the Bigfoot Museum in Cherokee, Georgia, or wherever the hell we were. And after everyone left and we were just chatting, he's like, what's really weird? Because he was telling us how, so the rift, the anti-ETH versus ETH rift that's grown in, say, the UFO community, there's a similar one in the Bigfoot community between the BDFRS or whatever that Bigfoot group is called.
Right.
So they're having a similar schism within their group. And this guy, his name was David something, I don't remember. Very cool dude. He's telling us about how he gets tons of reports, like almost daily, I think he said, of Bigfoot sightings in his area. And he doesn't report a lot of them because most of them are weird. And he said he couldn't tell us how many times people have said that the Bigfoot was floating.
Right.
Yeah. That was the thing that got me. I'm like, okay, I see.
Well, I think it stands to reason. I mean, Bigfoot is being hunted all the time, right? There's a lot of people.
So are ghosts.
Exactly, and with Bigfoot, no one's been able to bag one. If it is an animal, right? Or it's not an animal. Bigfoot's not an animal. If Bigfoot was a flesh and blood creature, being, person like you and I are, right?
There would be evidence.
Would have probably taken a shot by now, or at least gotten something, right? So I think a lot of people within the Bigfoot community, if there's no evidence and there's no hard evidence yet, okay, we need to start looking at potentially other options here as to what this is. And I think that this is the same thing, like within the UFO community, right? If we're just dealing with flesh and blood aliens like you and I, one of these things has to leave evidence at some point. I mean, it's flesh and blood like you and I. It's going to make a mistake. Right?
It's kind of shit.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, it's impossible that out of every single contact or abduction that's ever occurred, like none of them ever left behind a pen. You know what I mean? Like, or a scrap of paper or a needle or a syringe or, even
Bigfoot money. Bigfoot money.
Yeah. Or alien money or, like no one's, or people have been abducted, no one's ever stole something from the ship. You know what I mean? Like of all of the encounters. Right? It's almost like it's too perfect, right? There's too perfect. So maybe we're not dealing necessarily with physical flesh and blood creatures like you or me, because they never screw up.
I was incorrect. It wasn't Crypticon, it was Paramania.
Paramania, okay.
The guy who ran Paramania. So it wasn't
right.
Crypticon.
Well, still, it's I can see
same diff, yeah.
Yeah, and I can see the problem it creates, right? People want to problematize the fact that no one's ever bagged a Bigfoot or no one's ever just managed to steal anything off an alien ship or, get anything, like the aliens never left anything behind. Like okay, so can I vent for a minute here about UFOs for a second, like briefly?
Please, feel free.
I need to get this off my chest.
Away.
Do it.
Right. So I've spoken to people who said, listen, I believe it's flesh and blood aliens. I've been abducted. I've made contact, blah, blah, blah. And they're very careful and cautious and they never leave anything behind. They've never left anything behind. They're very careful and cautious and they don't want to disrupt our evolution or they don't want to disrupt our system so that we don't become wise to them and suddenly they become an enemy, blah, 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 blah. So they're incredibly, incredibly intelligent. And then I will look at them and say, and then I'll say, but they manage to crash flying saucers all the time into the desert, right? Like they crash a lot within like UFO discourse. There's like tons of UFO crashes all the time. They crash in Antarctica, they crash in New Mexico, they crash in Arizona, they crash in California. So they're stupid enough to crash their ships into deserts, but they're not stupid enough to not leave behind, a beer can every once in a while. Come on. Anyway, vent over.
Don't they drink curdled milk?
Yeah.
Oh, and that was another movie.
And in like the 1800s, they ate pancakes. They would trade pancakes for like water or whatever. God.
That's a great story, though.
It is glorious. Anyway, let's get back to the. I don't want to derail your show.
No, it's cool. I'm sorry, Nish.
I love it. Well, since we're on this, what is the distinct and this ties all of this really ties into Nox Mente, and we haven't veered off in other like other shows have. However, so what is a ghost to you, MJ? Or what are the varying degrees of what that phenomena possibly is?
Sure. I think it ties in. I think it ties into what I spoke to before, right? We're dealing with some sort of, um, let's say we're dealing with some sort of intelligent other, whatever it is, some sort of intelligent other. It's going to manifest how it manifests. And like I said, it uses us as a sort of like a sounding board. I think that there is. I'm going to make a bold claim here. I think there's fundamentally no difference between the UFO phenomenon and the ghost phenomenon. I think they're part of the same thing. I think they're just. I think whatever the intelligence is it's modeling itself or it's shaping itself in different ways to different people or to groups of people, in a sort of a co-creative process. Greg Bishop is a UFO researcher, and he sort of argued that he's created this hypothesis called the co-creation hypothesis, and I'm sort of springboarding off of that a little bit. But like I said, it uses us, to take form, and I'm going to argue that ghosts are the same thing. Some people see UFOs, some people see ghosts. Some people are haunted by UFOs and alien beings. Some people are haunted by what they believe to be the souls of the dead. That's my current belief structure.
Have you heard Whitley Strieber's diatribe on this?
I've read a lot of Whitley Strieber. I haven't heard his diatribe. Why? What does he say?
Basically, it's the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah.
His wife apparently is visiting him now, or communicating with him. So that's kind of the message he's getting. At least that's what I heard him say about a year ago.
Right. Yeah. I
think it was the THC episode he was on.
Okay. Yeah. I don't again recall off the top of my head, but that's sort of where I stand. I think, to answer your question about ghosts, I'm not totally convinced that ghosts are like spirits of the deceased. I don't think there's enough evidence to make that claim. I think we can believe that, and I think that people will have encountered ghosts to the point where they'll kind of have that in that sort of, again, that belief system that's what I think it is. But I think that there's a similar possible sort of argument that can be made that it's not the spirits of the dead, that it's the phenomenon, whatever it is, this intelligent other using your filters, your memories, your upbringing, your cultural background, whatever, to create itself so that you can encounter it in some way. I'm reminded of the famous scene at the end of the film Contact, where Jodie Foster sort of goes through I can call it a wormhole, I guess, to the alien sort of planet or the alien place, whatever it is,
the
dimension
1990s DMT experience.
Right. Yeah. And she ends up on this beach that she was always on as a kid, and she's greeted by her father. Right. And the aliens sort of tell her that, listen, this is the only way we can communicate with you. This is the only way that we can show ourselves to you, because our natural look or our natural state is so unfathomable. You wouldn't be able to comprehend. So we have created a place for you that you grew up on this beach, and we've taken the shape of your father, who's long deceased, to engage with you. And she sort of has this moment with her dad, and he sort of, like, sand through an hourglass. These are the days of our lives. He kind of tells her basically in a more convoluted way, and she goes back to home and Earth and wherever. So I think that's sort of a similar process that we're experiencing when it comes to ghosts.
You had mentioned earlier or alluded to the observation creates the phenomena where it's latent energy. I can't, in my notes here, got a little sloppy, but the
Sure.
latent energy through observation, like these entities or whatever they are, this energy, this latent energy kind of manifests around our ideas of observance. So if we start thinking the thought, and with like hauntings and or cryptids, all this stuff that's tied in, it it somehow awakens that, and we anthropomorphize
Right.
these beings into being by the power of observance, which we know is also scientifically viable.
Yeah, I spoke about this in again, like I can't prove any of this, so I want to make sure the audience is well aware of this. Like, I don't necessarily make truth claims. This is just again my personal belief system that I'm arguing for, my personal philosophy. Let's say I argue this I did a review of Dana and Greg Newkirk's. There they are again. Film Hellier, or their 6-part series on YouTube. It's really great. If you haven't seen Hellier, I'm going to plug it. Let's go see Hellier. It's on YouTube. It's free. They have this interesting moment. It's in episode 2 or 3 where they're talking about how the paranormal manifests, and I speak about it in my review because the idea is that the paranormal is actually all around us. The this other, whatever it is, it sort of surrounds us all the time. We sort of exist with it. We coexist with it. And it's only when we sort of go to the window and open it and look out that it kind of appears to us in some way. And it can appear in a lot of different ways, right? Again, it's using you as a sort of sounding board to have some sort of um, engagement with you. For some people, it's going to manifest in frightening and horrible, terrifying ways, and for some people, it's going to be peaceful and happy and soothing and calm. Good, what's bad for us is good for it. I don't know. So I think, okay, I'm getting stuck in philosophy here, but um, I think my claim is that we're kind of surrounded by it all the time. I'm not a believer in paranormal hotspots. I'm not a believer in haunted houses. I'm not a believer in any of that. I think it's everywhere, and I think certain people are just sometimes through maybe training or through natural insight or talent or whatever perception, are able to engage with it perhaps a little more effectively than other people. um, it could be genetic, it could be, I don't know, but I think there's some argument to be made for that. But I think anyone can kind of perceive it in some way. We've all had those moments of walking down the street and having that feeling like we're being watched, only to turn around and there's no one there. But we could swear, right, that we had that feeling and it was real. Or we've all had that experience where we see something out of the corner of our eye that sort of darted by, and when we look, there's nothing there, but we could swear we saw something. So I think that we're all kind of paranormalists in some way. We can all engage with it in some way. It's just how you go about it, I think, is part of it. I think that there's ways of doing it. I'm not an expert in that field, unfortunately, but I've spoken to enough people that I could probably argue for that there is some way of being proficient at seeing the paranormal all around us.
So with all this, how do you perceive you're dead? So, and when I say you're dead, I bring this to the personal level. Those that you know personally that have passed on, if you know any, including animals, where does this play in? And have you encountered them, say, in other states of consciousness, like in a liminal state through meditation or in dreams? Uh, even an active imagination where they come through in a solid way.
Right. Yeah. I would say I've never encountered it in a way that I would argue is in a paranormal nature. But I would definitely say that obviously I've had dreams where dead family members appeared in those dreams, and we would speak or communicate, or we would hang out together. So that's definitely occurred several times. I can recall sort of a couple of those just right now. But that's about it. I'm not sure if I've ever really had a moment where in a waking experience, I've been reminded of dead family. Maybe I'd be in a grocery store and I'd see someone that looks like my grandfather, and I'd be like, holy crap, that's my grandfather. And then realize, oh no, it's not. But you're almost positive that it was. Like the doppelganger kind of thing. So I've had that, but nothing sort of I would say nothing strange or out of the ordinary. I think a lot of people have dreams about their dead family and have sort of had those moments in the grocery store.
Do you so you said, at least you alluded to the fact that you did have these dreams. Do you recall a couple you could share with us?
Yeah, I think the one I had most recently, this was probably 4 or 5 months ago. My grandfather, so this is my mother's father, passed away sort of several years ago, of old age. They like the guy was like 92, lived a long, happy, healthy life. Um, so he passed away, and it wasn't sort of shocking or surprising. It just sort of happened, and it was expected. Um, the dream was, I was in his house, his old house, in his kitchen, and we were just, you know, drinking tea and sitting around the table as we did for ages. Like that was sort of the vast majority of my memories of my grandfather were sitting at his kitchen table, and we would be like eating lunch or having tea and eating cookies or toast or something like that, right? The sort of the communal table meal idea. And we just sort of sat there and talked. And then we went outside into his garden in his backyard, and we sort of, worked in the garden a bit and sat around and picked weeds. Like, it was like a very kind of plain experience, but it was very peaceful and soothing, right? Because it was sort of a taste of what it used to be like, right? It was I wouldn't say it was a memory, because I was very much my age. Because I often complained in the dream how my back was sore from pulling weeds. When you're 8, that's not a factor. So it was, yeah, it was interesting. It was very, very plain and simple. But it was, like I said, very, very calm, and whether it was purposeful on the part of my grandfather, or purposeful on the part of some other divinity, or intelligence, I can't speak to that. But it was a very interesting little dream that I still remember, to several months after the fact, and it just kind of occurred.
With that, what does so in general your dreamscape? So earlier you mentioned you don't recall your dreams often,
Mhm.
and then that still holds true, correct?
Yeah, I be honest, I couldn't tell you what I've dreamt for the last month. Like, I couldn't sit here and say I recall a dream.
Do you so without the recall of, say, the visual stuff, do you recall moods at all? So when you wake up and say the all the dream imagery is gone, you don't have no memory of dreaming. Do you wake up with moods that could have possibly been connected?
Potentially. I'm 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 in this state in my life where I have two very young children. I have a daughter who's 4 and
Yes.
a son who's 2. So, I have to be honest,
I'm
my
so
sleep
sorry.
yeah, my sleep time, I would say, is, and my mental state, in my sleep, is to basically allow my body to recharge, because I know that the next day is, going to be just running around and being exhausted. So again, I think maybe I don't remember dreams because my body is so damn tired, it doesn't even bother. It's just like, you know what, man, just recharge. We're just not gonna, like, if there is some weird intelligence controlling my dreams, it's being like, listen, bro, you fought hard enough today. We're just gonna leave you alone. We'll call you when they're 16. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's gonna happen, I think. Um,
Well, in other periods, say where things were less on the go, if that's even a
sure.
thing these days,
Right.
uh, where say you knew you dreamed and yet you don't have the recall of the dreams. Does mood play a part in the experience for you in the past?
Um, it's a really tough question, because I'd have to really think about it. I would say that there's definitely been moments where, I've woken up, you know being sort of angry and irrational, and I've woken up feeling totally happy and you know ecstatic. But I I can't necessarily speak to I can't comment as to whether it's because of dreams or not, because I just don't recall. um and my memory is awful. That also doesn't help. So I wish I could answer your question in a more meaningful and actual way, but I just can't. Um,
Well, you
yeah,
said, that's a significant statement. My memory's awful in conjunction with the fact that you don't recall your I
I
know
don't
you're
recall my dreams. No, I
yeah,
don't. Like I wake up in the
those
morning, I don't remember a single dream.
and that's completely, congruent with the fact that you would say your memory's awful in general because they're really connected to the same thing. It's
Right.
all kind of the not now, after the fact, right? It's all the past. And so I wanted to get into that. So, like in the pre-show, when you said there's not a lot of dreaming going on, this is always where all the juicy philosophizing happens,
Hmm.
and where we talk about it on that level, which you've brilliantly brought into this chit chat tonight. So, what do you think is going on with dreams in general as a function for at least sentient beings? I mean, we have to just kind of go there with presenting it on that level with sentience.
Yeah. I so good. Because I've got a minor in philosophy. This is thoroughly enjoyable for me. Listen, I'm a. I think I'm a bit more woo than I care to admit. Like I'm very much a skeptical person. I'm very much sort of scientifically minded. However, I do carry with myself a sort of romanticism, um, because I do think there is something significant about dreams, um, and not in just a defragmentation of the mind or the brain from a neurological standpoint, but from a accessing of a sort of a different place. Um, Again, I can't make any truth claims, but I do believe that the dream world is a sort of real place, um, where real things do occur. I'm Canadian, so where I live, the indigenous group that is sort of that sort of populated this land before the newcomers came, which is us. They in the Anishinaabe, which is the language group, the sort of the cultural group of the people who are here and still are here. They're the way they structured their reality was in one um, spectrum. So the waking world and the dream world were not two separate worlds. Rather, they intermingled and bled together all the time, and you would never say that the waking world was more important than the dream world, or you would because aspects of the dream world would filter into the waking, and aspects of the waking would filter into the dream, and you existed in both of these worlds simultaneously, and you existed in both of these worlds very in a very real way. Um, so you could cease to be both in the waking world, but you could also cease to be in the dream world as well. So you had to be very cautious. And all Anishinaabe philosophy kind of filters around this notion, this idea that we live along this sort of spectrum of world, not worlds but world, um, and dreams are a place, and dreams take you and you see him again. I'm getting words are getting lost in translation because they would have a much more elegant way of stating this in their own language or their own languages, but um, we I'm a firm believer that they're onto something. I'm a firm believer that there is something to be said for the fact that dreams are a real thing, not just a psychological manifestation. There's something very very objective to them in the sense that the things within dreams have um, time and place and mass, and we can they're physical in some way. They're not maybe physical in the same way the waking world is physical, but they do have a physicality. So yeah, from a philosophy standpoint, that's kind of where I stand. I really appreciate this mindset, um, because it opens you up to a lot more possibilities. I think when it comes to one, what reality is, and a lot of cutting edge science is now starting to really look into this weird world that that exists outside of our sort of daily reality, um, into this odd micro world. Um, and it really starts to throw wrenches into what we think is real. If Anishinaabe cultures such as the Ojibwe and the Cree, all and the Dene all kind of have similar philosophies, there's got to be a reason for it. And I think that you become much more connected to the world around you in a sense, because the rest of the world also has dreams too. Um, and what does that say about us as people, as communities, who have to live together? Um, yeah, I think it's incredibly compelling. So that's my position on the dream world. I think it's a very real place, um, and it's not. Yeah, I'll stop there because I'll let you guys go.
Well, juxtaposing that, so let's move into reality. What makes this have such, and of course we're philosophizing here.
Mhm.
This is everything is opinion based. I mean, you can certainly cite scientific stuff if you want, but this is the fun of Nox Mente. So what makes this apparent reality acute? What brings us to a consistent state of lucidity within it
Sure.
where it feels so valid and real, and uh with everything, the constraints we feel, the love we feel, all this vividness.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think we're dealing with again, sort of from purely biological evolutionary standpoint. We've had to become very acute here. You have to be able to see the bear and run away from it. You have to be able to locate food or deal with um, conflict in a very real way. Where perhaps in potentially the more dream reality, those things aren't um, as threatening, or they're not as prevalent, or they don't exist in the same way they do here. Um, Unfortunately, you know, hides in the body, or if consciousness in part is tied to our body in some way, which I think we can argue it is, because I'm walking around and I'm self-aware. Um, the consciousness, at least in some way, resides, or at least is tied to my physical structure. Um, it's going to work very hard to maintain that physical structure, so that it doesn't get shuffled, and eaten by a bear. So I think that's part of it. I think we have to be acute because our survival purely depends on it. Um, that's my argument, or at least that's my claim regarding it. I would also say there's a lot of, again, the world around you, you perceive it, like you perceive the table in front of you, or the microphone, or the laptop, or the light bulb, or your phone, or whatever. They're physically there, but what those things actually are in some objective state, we don't know. We've worked very hard as a society and as cultures to create sort of reality for ourselves that is recognizable and easy to process. The phone, or the laptop, or the table is only those things because we've all agreed that that's what it is on a cultural level. Um, Outside of us, the table, the phone, and the laptop are very different things. So, that I think that's another aspect. We've created an ideological importance for the sense of physical self. Um, you know, I am me is a very ideological claim, and I need to survive in order to be happy, in order to have love, in order to exist, in order to have any worth or value. These are, again, ideological claims we've all sort of agreed to, and we've structured our societies based upon those claims.
So with using the analogy earlier of we've had to become acute because of the perils,
Yeah,
the
the
bear
bear.
or
Yeah.
yeah. What about the full spectrum of senses that we know exist that we actually don't have access to, that we're aware of? The
Yeah.
full visual spectrum, the clara spectrum of psychic senses. is it possible? Where does that all play in? Because I think if we were to engage or suddenly have access to them, things like the shadow man and this could also filtrate to whatever the other is, and however we anthropomorphize it
Yeah.
start to appear, and possibly there are threats. I mean, we understand there's a lot of talk always about parasitical beings on us and stuff.
Right.
That's a threat. So how does that all play into this idea?
Right. Well, here's the thing. Like, the beauty of evolution from a strictly biological, scientific, materialist sense, right? Evolution is a very beautiful and elegant system because it creates and it works towards the survival of the organism, the best possible survival of the organism. So it could be argued then, from a strictly materialist scientific standpoint, that these other spectrums of perception, as well as these other entities or these intelligences or whatever, do not necessarily pose a direct physical threat. Therefore, um, the evolution would naturally filter out, over millions of years, the fact that the shadow man is not a real threat in any physical way, maybe in a psychological way, but that doesn't matter, because fundamentally you need to run away from the bear, not the shadow man, because the shadow man isn't going to eat you and your family, but the bear will. So from a again, just from the passing on of genetic material, we don't necessarily need to be able to see in these other spectrum, or we don't necessarily need to be able to engage with psi phenomena in a very acute way, because it doesn't help our survival directly. What complicates all this as well is the fact that humans, very early on, in sort of, roughly like a million years ago or so, sort of Homo erectus running around like that, when we sort of were in that stage of our existence, um, we very quickly realized that working together, being social and using technology, did a lot of great stuff for us. So we didn't necessarily need to be able to have an awareness of the bear in some psychological sense or some parapsychological sense. I didn't need to remote view the bear, because I have fire and the fire just keeps the bear away anyway. So it's a lot easier for me just to have fire and do it that way, versus having to do it in any other way. And tool making was really a huge leap for us. Socially, it was a huge leap for us, biologically as well, because with tools comes the ability to consume more calories, brain development increases, we become more social, we can communicate more effectively, and all of a sudden we're the only animal on the planet that can organize, communicate, build technology, hunt, gather large supplies together, and then eventually be able to surplus our supplies to the point where we can specialize. And now you have people who are specifically one job or specifically another, and suddenly you have 2019 today. You've had a lot of filtering occurring of what do we need to deal with immediately in this reality, in this very acute objective reality that's going to keep us alive, biologically, versus our psychological development, or our development with um uh, like psi phenomena, or an acute awareness of other spectrums of perception that would potentially allow us to see the shadow man, or these other creatures or beings that aren't within the visible light spectrum, let's say. So I guess I would argue that maybe evolution is part of the problem, right? Technology is part of the problem. Evolution will always find the simplest, most effective way to keep an organism alive, and this is the route we've gone, right?
Yes, definitely. And of course, the shaman comes to mind in cultures, and even into modern day culture, which has been wonderfully put in Neil Gaiman's book, American Idols. Uh,
American Gods.
however,
American Gods.
American Gods, sorry.
Mhm.
However, with the let's travel down this road, since I know you listen to the show with Penny.
Yeah.
And so with this idea in hand, the concept of possession, and so we look at it from we back so backing it up with the psi phenomena
Mhm.
of the spectral senses exist that we don't have access to consciously, at least, uh and how that our organism, our bioorganism, avatar, whatever you want to call it, can just be and is, if you look at it from a religious standpoint too, is just a host to what is just commonly known as the soul or
Sure.
your essence. So, what if, say, some of these entities, these others that could and very well may exist that we are not able to access consciously or see physically because of our limitations are taking over. And this is why I kind of springboard off the Tenny conversation, which I know you listen to, and it's just been a query of mine recently. Where do you see all that blending in here where you could be you but not you? Something could take hijack your shell, hijack your body.
Right. Oh, for sure. I mean, and I mean, this is ancient. I mean, the vast majority of cultures throughout their histories have accounts of possession and that type of occurring. And it's interesting you brought up the shaman, right? Because the shaman is this great example of someone who has an acute, or at least can train themselves to have an acute awareness of these other realms. Let's say these other perceptive areas of reality that the vast majority of us cannot. Um, and again, we still have this today, right? You have countless people who claim that they can communicate with the dead, or at least what they perceive to be the dead. So I don't think necessarily that our perception of these other, again, I'm using the term realities, um, doesn't exist. I think people do still have access to that. I think these events still occur, and I think there's a lot of people who claim abilities. I know someone who says they're a water witch and they can douse water, or they can use dowsing rods to find water, and they're right most of the time. So I would argue that they somehow are able to find water. So I think that this sort of perception does still exist.
Anyone can
Where
find water. Stuff. Why?
to dig a hole.
No, with divining rods.
Oh, see, well, there you go. So we do clearly have some sort of ability to still function in this way. Um, so I don't think it's totally gone. I think maybe it's part of us, and shamans are an interesting idea in how there's people who can access these other places and interact with these other entities for good or for ill. They can protect us from them, right? Which is sort of the shaman's role typically, was to keep the group safe from these attacks from negative entities or spirits or whatever you want to call them. And then there's also, the role of in an archetypal sense, the role of sort of the witch, or the one who makes the evil deals, right? The one who engages with the evil entities and brings them closer to the group, right? They're the one who pulls them towards the rest of us. And then obviously the natural reaction from the rest of us is, we get rid of the witch. Or I don't mean to use the term the witch, but it's just, again, I'm using an archetypal
Oh
claim.
yeah, it works in context here.
Right. Yeah. I'm not saying witches are bad. They're nice people. The notion of possession is interesting, right? Because again, the how often does the the thing which possesses sort of directly kill the host, right? Um, and more importantly, does your biology, are the cells in your body and your DNA aware of this, right? Which is a very intriguing idea, because again, evolution is only gonna work in the sense that it deals with reality on a biological or material sense. So if you're dealing with something that's immaterial, is the body going to recognize that it's not you inside you, and you're being controlled? The husk is being controlled by something else. Um, that isn't biological, because again, ultimately, in any biological sense, viruses are designed to do just that, right? They enter your body and they try to take control. and then your body goes into high gear to get rid of the virus, right? It starts fighting it, and it attacks it on a biological sense. It's a biological enemy. The same thing, if anything physical or material enters your body will react and it will attack the foreign object. Um, so it's interesting, right? So now we're not necessarily dealing with a foreign object. We're not dealing with something physical. We're dealing with something immaterial, something that the body biologically can't deal with. Therefore, evolution would have no interest in filtering it out or dealing with it in any real sense, in any acute way. It would just be like, whatever, I'm still alive. Who cares? Um, so when it comes to possessions, this is interesting, right? Because then automatically you could kind of stipulate, well, one, that means demons or any possessing force isn't physical in any way. It doesn't enter the body like a physical object would, or a living creature would, like a bacterium or a virus. It's something else, right? It's something non-physical, non-corporeal. Um, and it's interesting, right? Because then, does consciousness itself have an evolutionary process to fight those things? Does consciousness undergo evolution just like the body does, or just like our cells have? This is an interesting idea. I've never really thought about it. Wow, I'm going down a different road now. I never considered this.
That's a common belief structure, I would say, of the people who communicate with quote unquote dead, and they say this is a learning experience, and we're evolving our consciousness by being here.
Right, and I can sort of appreciate that. Again, as someone who's Catholic, demonic possession is a very real aspect of the faith, right? It's a tenet of being Catholic. Demons are a thing, right? They're an objective.
Everything is demons.
Not everything.
No.
A lot of things are demons.
It's a joke.
It's one of Jerry's jokes.
No. A lot of things are demons, but not all things. I get the joke, but it's it's curious, right? Because again, as someone who is scientifically minded, I'm often engaged in this sort of ideological struggle, right? I personally, as a skeptic and as a person who's scientifically minded, I don't necessarily buy into that, right? But as a Catholic, I have to. So I'm kind of stuck again in this odd liminal realm of belief systems. Do I believe in demons or don't I? And what does that say about me as a person or as a Catholic or whatever?
And does believing in them allow you to manifest them or communicate? You know what I mean? Is belief part of that structure, that model?
Yeah, it depends who you talk to, right? A theologian, a Catholic theologian, would say no, they exist whether you believe in them or not. And a skeptic would say they don't exist at all, or a paranormal, someone who believes in more paranormal structures or constructs would say, well, if you believe in them, they become real, and if you don't believe in them, they can't hurt you, right? So again, there's a lot of differentiated ideas present in how we discuss this and how the discourse functions around them.
But we still have to factor in all of this, the science that's come to light in, that we know about with it, which is again back to the spectrum of what we perceive as reality. And so they have a case. The Catholics or people who are talking demons have a real case there, in my opinion. We don't know.
Oh, for sure. And
we can measure these things, and that's what those of you that are investigators are trying to do. But right now, we just don't empirically know.
Sure. Yeah, and like I'll give the Catholic Church some academic credit. They don't they're very cautious before they label anything sort of a demonic possession. Like any person who claims to be possessed in the Catholic Church has to go. There's a lot of steps before it's actually labeled a legitimate possession. Like the person has to go see a psychiatrist. Like that's a requirement. So like the amount of exorcisms that actually occur they're very rare. But there's a lot of hoops that have to get jumped through before an exorcism is legitimately performed, at least within sort of the official Roman Catholic Church.
But
It
as you know, it only takes one, MJ.
That's right. And but in other, in other, I can't speak for other Christian denominations, right? Because I am not aware of how they deal with this phenomenon. But yeah, I mean, the Catholic Church has a long history of engaging with sort of the demonic, and cataloging it, and I would argue that if they're performing a real exorcism, there's been a lot of due diligence that's been done. Again, you know, I struggle, right? Because I'm not sure if I necessarily believe in it totally yet, or maybe I'm on that journey. Who knows? But yeah, it's a thing, right? There's a lot of people who would say that yes, this is a real phenomenon that occurs. Um, you know, I don't know. Yeah, I'll sit on the I don't know at this point.
Yeah, well, this I love to talk on this level, and that's why the Tenny conversation was so enjoyable because we allow ourselves that liminal space of communication with others, like with you, and this has just been so juicy, as I like to say a lot, and a wonderful conversation with you. That I can't even believe how the time is flight. I don't want to. I know that we try to keep it at 2 hours. I know you have a lot going on, so I wanted to make sure if there were any questions from those listening that they have an opportunity to get those into you.
Yeah, totally.
I haven't asked yet, but I will. If anyone has any questions, put them in the chat. Someone did ask, Philip Blair asked if you've researched any friendly possessions.
I'm actually not. I've never researched possessions really. I've done a bit of reading on the subject matter, but I'm not an expert in that sort of field of study. So in my reading, I have never encountered that. However, the vast majority of my reading is approached from a more of a Catholic perspective on the subject. So I don't think within sort of the Catholic world it would be known as a possession if it was friendly, or it is friendly and it's like deceiving you, because that would still be a demon, I guess. I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to go down that road. There's probably better experts to talk to in regards to possession phenomena.
Okay. You don't have to be an expert. Okay,
yeah, I think I mean I can speak in regards to UFOs and alien contact experiences. A lot of people have said that sometimes during contact experiences they become possessed in a sense by the being that they're channeling, or the being is using them as a sort of conduit to communicate. That happens often within sort of UFO discourse. Yeah. You'll have people who claim to be channelers, and they're channeling interdimensional beings or aliens on faraway planets, and they sort of become possessed by that entity, and then it speaks through them. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how many of them are legitimate, how many of them are just actors, versus sort of the authentic ones, because it's very difficult to prove any of it. And I think that the big litmus test, at least for me, is if they're charging you money, or they're making a profit by doing it. I'm not really sure if how legitimate they can be.
Or removing your alien implants. That's another good scam.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Right. And they don't actually remove anything. Like, they remove your alien implant, and then they tell you it's a metaphysical implant. It's not a real physical implant.
It's in your aura.
It's like an aspect. Yeah, it's like an aspect of your consciousness that's been implanted.
Yeah, it's an etheric parasite.
It really there is no implant. It's just like a thing it's like a symbol in your heart. Like it's that kind of thing.
It's a thought form. Once you decide that you have one,
that's right.
You probably create it yourself.
And you have to pay them $150 cash up front for them to remove it. Yeah. That's a real sticking point. So friendly, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I agree with the monies and all that chicanery that goes on, because traditionally we see this. It's still out there. Traditionally, people that were helping, and we see this with the shamans and certain witches, and outsiders that were healers of different kinds. did these services because it's what it was like gifted to a gift they came in with,
Right.
and this is the mythos around a lot of it, and therefore it it wasn't something there's a barrier there in trade that goes on. Like, this is your gift, this is what you give to the community.
Right.
And so in the modern world, I can understand one needing to make a living, but and for as long as we can think in the modern world too, with and I just don't want to use any trigger words, but with people that have charged money for services like this that are just absurd. And so it 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 casts a terrible shadow on those that are actually doing the real work and helping, and and the phenomena that may be going on, even if it's just purely psychological. And I think that's a terrible thing. It's one of the reasons why I've never personally charged for tarot readings. I've been a long time tarot reader, and I've done donations certainly, but I don't expect them. And this is way back when I don't do it anymore, just for close friends. But way back when I was doing it for kind of a living, and it wasn't like, oh, half hours this, hours that, and then otherwise you don't charge, and you have people putting the bug in your ear that your time's worth something. Then you invest in that, and then the great wheel keeps on turning. I got rent, I've got this. It's this reality, MJ, is so complex in these ways
Mhm.
that I think some of this otherness that is beautiful and spiritual and magical gets tied down in all of that. And then there are the cons, the snake oil sellers that come in and take advantage of that, who could be considered the demons or the parasitical ones.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
A ball of mess.
I think within traditional cultures, like ancient cultures where shamans played a vital role within the community, the community didn't have to deal with a capitalist system of economics, right? um, the community was communal. The shaman was fed because the shaman provided a service, and the shaman was not expected to go hunt, but rather did his or her thing, and that was part of just the society they lived in. Where today, we live in a world where you have to sell your labor in order to eat. And it's not necessarily about a fair contribution or anything like that. It's just about nepotism, and it's about purely
Survival.
survival in, yeah. And you owe your money, and you owe money to the bank, and you owe money to your credit card and whatever. So we live in a very different world, where the metaphysical almost cannot like properly exist or function in a capitalist state. Capitalism as a system is and is such an antithesis to like this metaphysical realm that we've been discussing for the last 2 hours. That the two can't go hand in hand because they're totally incongruent. The notion that we ought to help each other and defend against potential harm from unseen foes, and we're all in this together, is directly in contradiction to the capitalist mentality, where you literally need to like step on other people in order to make more money and survive better, quote unquote.
Service to others versus service to self.
To self, exactly, right. I mean, so there's it's unfortunate, right? So you have, let's say, people who have gifts or talents and the ability to engage with perhaps the more metaphysical realm, or these other states of reality that the vast majority of us perhaps are not as good at accessing. And I get it, they have to eat, but yet there's almost like a moral or more moral duty to help others anyway. Like could it potentially or eventually be argued that there's a good Samaritan law when it comes to like parapsychology or warding off evil spirits? You know what I mean? Like if you saw someone getting mugged, you have to call the police, right? It's like the good Samaritan thing to do, right? You have a moral duty to help.
Depends on who it is.
I guess so, yeah. But like if somebody's having a heart attack on the street, you're sort of morally obligated to call 911, right, and stay with them, right? Like one could argue that if someone was having a heart attack on the street and you walked away and said, not my problem, you would, you're not exactly a good moral agent. Someone could argue. In Canada, like you could be held liable, right? Like so where I'm from, if somebody has a heart attack on the street, you have to stay with them and call 911. Because you're partially responsible, right? At least in most cases. So because we have a very strong Good Samaritan law here.
And if you don't, the dude might haunt you if he dies.
That's another problem that you have to face, right? And I just don't need that on me.
Nobody does.
So could it be argued that if you have the gift, right, and you can if somebody's in peril and you know it, aren't you morally obligated to kind of inform them, or do you have to charge money for that first? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. It's an odd thing to think about. How the culture of paranormal and new age communities, and I hate the term new age. It's just again, for context, we all know what that means.
I agree.
Yeah.
Right. We're just using it as a term just to appreciate the group we're talking about.
Everybody knows.
It's a CIA program. We all know it.
Yeah. So you have this, there's this odd cultural discrepancy, right? Between the belief systems and the belief structures and the frameworks that exist within paranormal communities and that exist in new age communities about, peace, love, and serving others. Yet in the same breath, they exist within this sort of broader capitalist state, which is not about that, right? It's about the bottom line and making as much money as you can for your shareholders and for yourself, where one's wealth dictates value. So you have this weird juxtaposition, right? And in my book, I argue that a lot of paranormal communities are countercultural in nature, right? They rub up against this mainstream ideological framework because they can't coexist, and there's significant conflict there. Yet at the same sort of time, you have this sort of odd handshake agreement that exists, because New Age, again, I hate the term, sorry, but New Age conferences, paranormal conferences, UFO conferences are still there to earn money in order to make profit, in order to have more conferences, as well as pay the people who are involved and put money in the pocket of the organizers to kind of keep that ball rolling, right? It becomes a job or a career, right? You sell your labor for profit. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of weird cultural blend, and I like kind of talking about it and thinking about it because that's kind of my jam. I just find it very interesting and compelling. I don't know why I brought it up.
It's cool.
Shamanism, totally cool. That's why. Yeah, shamanism.
So I got two more questions, and one of them, they're probably both going to be long. So the first one was what do you think of Jacques Vallée's work, his theories? Yeah,
I can keep this short. Jacques Vallée's theories are incredibly important. I think they're incredibly influential within not even just UFO discourse, but within paranormal discourse, because a lot of my personal beliefs when it comes to the phenomenon stem from the work that he's produced, just sort of extrapolating forward on them a little bit. So no, I think Jacques Vallée is an essential read for anyone interested in the paranormal.
Absolutely.
And I'll stop there. That answers the question.
Okay, great. And then you can just go as long as you want on this one. So, forgot who asked this. It was Philip. No, it was Chimpertainment. Thank you, Chimpertainment. What do you think is happening in out-of-body experiences? Do we actually have an astral body, so to speak, or do you think it's more like bilocating or a non-local consciousness?
Oh, man.
That's a good one.
Yeah, because well, okay, so like my caveat always is I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, okay. So I'll say this. I do believe that an aspect or I do believe that consciousness itself is a structure that exists outside of us. I believe it's tied to my physical body in some way, because it's I I think therefore I am. Um, but on the flip side, I think that there's sort of this extension of it outwards, because we know that through the research done by, let's say, like the Institute of Noetic Science, for example, people people can influence other people's decisions, or influence the material world around them via thinking or via consciousness, right? There's enough data out there that proves that psi phenomenon are
It's
real.
real, yeah, absolutely. There's a whole
And
Maharaji effect thing too.
yeah, and I mean, even just, like the types of tests they've done that have scored so high above chance, I mean, something is happening.
And couple that with like the wisdom of the crowd type of a phenomena.
Right,
And you've got like this whole ball of wax, like what the hell is going on? Yeah,
one of the most interesting things I was told, and again, I can't verify if it's true or not, but because it was told me by one person, and I've never sort of done any more research. I just didn't. But they informed me that when they train snipers in the military, the and again, I would love to meet a sniper who could actually verify this for me, apart from the person who told me it. Um, they train the snipers to not bead the target until they're going to squeeze the trigger. Because what tends to happen is the target, if the crosshairs are on them too early, or if like they've been beaded by the little red dot thing in the sight too early, um, what happens is the target kind of goes, huh, and then they get out of the way, or they duck, or they get to cover, or they have that feeling of, something's wrong, right?
Because the sniper's so focused on the target that there's a connection made.
Exactly. So what they and it tends to happen a lot, apparently, to the point where training for American snipers is that you keep the crosshairs off the target, and you don't really think about the shot until you're going to make it. So the target is sort of just outside of the bead or the crosshair, and then basically once you get the go to shoot, that's when you put it on them, and then you squeeze the trigger so they don't have that sense, right? To get out of the way, or to move inside, or even that feeling of just ill ease, which makes them want to go inside. So they start moving around a little more. They become more erratic. A sitting target is easier to hit than a moving one. Right? So, ultimately, we have instances where even in military training, soldiers are taught to think differently because their thoughts could potentially affect the objective they're trying to achieve. So clearly there's enough evidence to suggest that consciousness is not local as well, right? If my thoughts can affect other things, clearly there's something going on here. Consciousness is able to leave me in some way and interact with the world around me. Yet it is still tied to me, right? Because again, I sit here and I am aware of myself in this room that I'm talking to you on this podcast, and I'm aware of the things I'm saying, and I have a general awareness of my existence. So it's almost like, do we leave, or are we do we reside in sort of these both realms, or is it maybe more complicated than that? So I don't necessarily like the term like astral travel or anything like that, because I think it tries to oversimplify something that's very complicated and nuanced. And again, I think there's some ideological cultural baggage that's attached to that term as well, from again sort of this new agey kind of woo woo ideology that's kind of been pushed on us by the media and by pop culture.
Right. But then again, you have to ask: is the, I'm going to call it programming, the programming from media, the internet, movies, whatever, forming your beliefs to believe you have this astral body, and when these people go astral traveling, they think that's what it is, but it's actually some other experience that we don't actually understand.
Sure, I think that's definitely sure. I think that's definitely that's a great way of looking at it. We perceive the experience as such because of the media, and that's how we've come to identify it, and therefore it allows it to occur in some way, right?
Right, it facilitates it.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, that's 3 questions. That's 3 more than last week.
Perfect.
All right. Well, MJ, do you want to plug anything before we let you go?
Sure. Yeah. I'd love to. My website is www.mjbanias.com. It links to all of my work. I have a YouTube channel. Every Thursday night, I do a sort of a live show on YouTube. It's really just a conversation with cool people in the paranormal and scientific communities. We just kind of shoot the shit for an hour. So you can check it out on my YouTube channel, and that's just youtube.com/MJ Banias.
Links in the description, everyone.
Links, great.
Yeah, I love your show, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, it's just kind of chill, but it's fun to do. I write for Motherboard, so if you ever see sort of anything UFO related on Vice or Motherboard, it's probably me. I'm sort of their weird desk. And
Cool.
apart from that, my blog's terraobscura.net. My book is on Amazon, The UFO People, A Curious Culture. Please go check it out. Yeah, there you go. Plugs in. Thank you very much.
Hey, you're welcome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. Thank you for coming and bringing all this content. It was a very, very enjoyable conversation.
Definitely. Absolutely.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. This has been fun. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right. So hang on one second. I'm going to say goodbye everyone. Thanks for listening. Be sure to tune in next week when we have William Ramsey of William Ramsey Investigates. Hopefully we'll get to hear some good smiley face killer stories. Bridge pusher stories. Yeah. Cool. So this should be a good show. We got some good guests lined up for the next 2 months. So hope you all enjoy it. And thanks for listening. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Much love.